Imagine an entire civilization, one of the greatest in human history, balanced on a knife's edge. What if a single, simple failure could bring it all crashing down? This isn't a story of gods or pharaohs, but of a quiet, relentless threat that haunted the daily lives of every single person in ancient Egypt. This annual event, known as the inundation, was not just a flood, it was the engine of an entire civilization. Without it, the desert would reclaim the land in an instant. Everything, and I mean everything, depended on this cycle. The grain that grew in these fields fed the farmers, the soldiers, the priests, and the artisans who built the tombs and temples. The surplus grain was the nation's wealth, its currency, and its safety net. Scribes meticulously recorded the water levels, using millimeters to predict the harvest. From this data, they calculated taxes, planned food distribution, and organized massive public works projects. The entire state, from the smallest village to the pharaoh's court, operated on the assumption that the Nile would provide. It was a masterpiece of planning and administration, a system honed over centuries. But its perfection was also its greatest weakness. For an ordinary Egyptian family, the rhythm of the Nile was the rhythm of life itself. A farmer would watch the river rise with a mix of hope and anxiety. His children would grow up strong, not knowing the gnawing pain of hunger. Downstream, a baker in a bustling town relied on a steady supply of wheat and barley, delivered by barges that sailed the Nile. But this reliance created a silent, ever-present tension. What if the system failed? The weak point was devastatingly simple: a change in the flood. What if the inundation came late? What if the waters were too low, leaving the fields high and dry? Or what if they were too high, washing away villages and destroying everything in their path? This wasn't just a possibility, it was a recurring nightmare. The historical records, the papyri that survived the ages, tell us of these moments. A low Nile meant the floodplain shrank. Fields that were usually fertile turned to dust. The scribes' predictions would be worthless, their careful calculations thrown into chaos. Distribution plans would fall apart as officials faced the impossible task of dividing too little among too many. The grain reserves, the great storehouses that were Egypt's insurance policy, would begin to empty at an alarming rate. The delicate trust that held society together would begin to fray. The system was failing. When the Nile faltered, the consequences were real and immediate. This wasn't a drama, it was a brutal, historical fact. Periods of low floods, confirmed by geological data and ancient texts, led directly to famine. The famine stela, a carving from the Ptolemaic period, recounts a 7-year drought that occurred centuries earlier. Describing a land in despair, people were starving, the official rations stopped. The central government, unable to feed its people or pay its workers, lost its authority. Social order broke down. Tomb inscriptions from what historians call the First Intermediate Period paint a grim picture of chaos, where the wealthy became poor and desperation led to lawlessness. We see evidence of malnutrition and skeletal remains from these times. People abandoned their homes and villages, migrating in search of food, putting immense pressure on neighboring regions. The unity of the two lands, of Upper and Lower Egypt, fractured. The state, for a time, effectively collapsed. This wasn't due to a foreign invasion or a battle lost. It was the result of a quiet, internal failure. A river that didn't rise enough. But Egypt endured. It didn't just survive these crises, it learned from them. The collapses were never permanent because the Egyptians were masters of adaptation and long-term planning. Their survival was a triumph of human ingenuity. They responded to the threat not with prayer alone, but with intelligence. They refined their ability to measure and predict the flood. They built and expanded a massive, state-controlled system of granaries. Vast storehouses designed to hold years of surplus grain. They are vulnerable, not just to dramatic invasions, but to quiet, systemic failures. It shows us that foresight, planning, and resilience are not just good ideas. They are the essential tools for long-term survival. The pyramids were not built by magic. And they didn't stand for millennia by accident. Ancient Egypt survived its greatest crises not because of divine intervention or mystical power. It survived because of foresight. It survived because of engineering. It survived by planning. Thank you for watching.